What happened to Saul on the road to Damascus? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 9, verses 1 to 9, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts chapter 9, verse 1, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 9, beginning at verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he said, "Who are you, Lord?" Then the Lord said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads." So he, trembling and astonished, said, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" Then the Lord said to him, "Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Most of chapter 8 dealt with the preaching of Philip, first to the Samaritans, then to the Ethiopian eunuch. However, chapter 8 began with the persecution of the church that Saul began after the death of Stephen in chapter 7. It is this persecution that Luke returns to here in chapter 9. In verse 1 of chapter 9, we find that Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord who were in Jerusalem and in the surrounding region. However, stamping out Christianity around Jerusalem was not enough for Saul, for he knew that his persecution caused followers of Christ to scatter. Therefore, he wanted to go into the surrounding areas of Palestine in order to bring back disciples of Jesus to the Sanhedrin to be tried and put in prison. So Saul asked for letters from the high priest that he could take to the synagogues in Damascus that would instruct them to have followers of Jesus arrested and sent to Jerusalem for trial. He was going to deliver these letters personally in order to ensure that they got to their intended destination, and the orders contained therein were followed. A funny thing happened to Saul on the road to Damascus. For as he came near Damascus, a light shone round about him from heaven. This light caused Saul to fall to the ground, and when he did so, he heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Now to Saul, he didn't know who this was, but he knew it wasn't from this earth. So he asked the voice, "Who are you, Lord?" I am sure that Saul was shocked with the response that he got, which was that the voice was Jesus, whom Saul had been persecuting. Think about that for a moment. Saul had heard of the resurrection of Jesus because the apostles had been proclaiming it in Jerusalem and throughout Palestine. Saul didn't believe their accounts, declaring it to be blasphemy against God himself, for Jesus claimed to be God, another thing that the disciples were preaching. But here Saul was, walking on the road to Damascus, when he heard the voice of Jesus, whom he thought was dead, speaking to him from heaven. Jesus goes on to tell Saul that it is hard to kick against the goads. An ox goad is a wooden tool approximately 8 feet long, fitted with an iron spike or point at one end, which was used to spur oxen as they pulled a plow or a cart. Therefore, if an ox kicks against the ox goads, they do this to their own hurt. Instead, they should quietly submit to go the way and the pace his master chooses he should go. Saul was kicking against the goads by persecuting the church that God himself set up, a fruitless exercise, for who was Saul to defeat God? Instead, it was better for Saul to yield at once to God and no longer despise the Spirit of grace who was revealing God's word to the people. Saul got the message. He needed to stop persecuting Jesus. The question now for Saul, what did the Lord want him to do? Was he to go back to Jerusalem? Was he continue to Damascus? Was he to go someplace else? The Lord told Saul to go into the city, and it would be told Saul what he must do. Jesus here didn't tell Saul what he needed to do, but he did promise Saul that someone would tell him what he needed to do. And so, with these words, Jesus' appearance to Saul ended. Amazingly, those who were with Saul could hear a voice, but from what we will read in Acts 22, they did not understand the voice, meaning that only Saul could understand what was being said. This shouldn't surprise us, for God can reveal himself and conceal himself to whomever he wills. The issue for Saul was he couldn't see, for the light had blinded him. Thus he was led by the hand to Damascus, where he waited for 3 days without sight, neither eating or drinking. We'll continue with this story, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 9, verses 10 to 19, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.